President Biden addressed the nation in the wake of former President Jimmy Carter's death. He commended the late statesman, but when a reporter asked him after his remarks what President-elect Trump could take from Carter's legacy, Biden replied, decency. So we had to pay tribute to Carter, but also take a little swipe at Trump. Let's talk this over with political commentator from Young Voices. Victoria Churshill is back on the Davison Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Victoria, welcome back to WHO Radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Always fun to be on with you in the morning. You've always got so much energy. I love it.
It's always a party, regardless of what's going on, Victoria. Thank you. Hey, I always sort of examine my heart when there's a story like this in the media. Like, is this really a big deal or not? But it does kind of bug me that in a point where you could be just paying tribute to a former president, you take a swipe at the person that's going to be replacing you in the office. Victoria, is this a big deal, or what did you think?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. As you pointed out, this was something that came out of a question that was asked by a reporter. So obviously, as a strategist in politics, you have some kind of certain talking points that you want your principals to point out. And, this one didn't make the list. But then, obviously, as a reporter, you know that you're supposed to get fun headlines and as they tell you, make news. Sometimes. And so, sometimes you get these answers out of people that maybe not necessarily aligned with what their messaging is supposed to be, but is actually how they really feel, which is sometimes, I think, an interesting dissonance. And I think that's a little bit of what has potentially happened here. I do think that Biden is kind of trying to hold on to the spotlight in some ways. I think as we've seen the treatment both by the nation, but also really by international figures and leaders, I think some of these people have been treating incoming President Trump as if he is the president because they realize that he kind of is, in my view, going to kind of put America first, obviously, and make sure that Americans are being well respected. America and Americans are being well respected across the globe, which I think hasn't necessarily been the case over the course of the Biden administration. But there was also another comment that Biden made in recent days. There's a Fox News story on it about how he wanted to go ahead and say that, if he hadn't have dropped out of the race, he could have beat Trump. And, those of us that followed the election closely as I did, I spent 6 months as a campaign reporter with the New York Post, following Trump and Vance all over the Eastern Seaboard. And, we looked at the polling, of course, as everybody did over that time. And, we knew that there was really no chance for Biden to win, right? And so, I think he came to realize that at some point. And so the fact that he's kind of coming out in these final days of his presidency, I think trying to leave maybe a less sour taste in the mouths of the American people, right, if we're being honest. I think that's what this really is.
So, Victoria, I really like your comment about sometimes the public face slips, right? Because I feel like we're going to find out in the next couple of years, when all the books come out, how angry he is. Like you said, very important point that he's already said that he thinks if he had stayed in the race, he would have won. I think he's a lot angrier about everything that occurred during this campaign season, including being forced out of the race after actually legitimately winning the nomination. So what do you think? I think there's like two stories over the next couple of years. One is how angry he really was about it all. And of course, number two, how mentally impaired he actually was these last 4 years, which is just a scandal that the media decided that wasn't their job to tell us that. What do you think?
I think you hit on a couple points, and I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I think, probably that anger and that frustration is probably tied to his mental state, which, I think the common consensus is that it is a lot worse or a lot more, advanced if he's got some kind of, diseases or anything, right? Like, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not going to diagnose, but there's lots of theories about what he potentially could and could not have. And so I think those two things play hand in hand, that, if he was trusted to be in this position, but also really like washed over by everybody and anybody around him, covered up, all of these things. I think there was definitely a degree of that. And then as these stories come out over the next couple of years, whether that's interviews, whether that's books from those closest to him, I think the American people will realize exactly how much went on behind the scenes and how kind of cohesive this cover-up was from the White House. but also, from the Democrats as a whole, that they really kind of in one fell swoop told him, yeah, I mean, I watched it, right? Like mainstream media outlets that traditionally side very heavily with Democrats started running, op-eds one after the other from top Obama and Clinton and, even some Biden strategists that were not in the White House orbit necessarily that were saying, he should drop out, he's not going to make it, yada, yada. And you kind of saw like one after the other, these things pop out. So, even Democrats realized that he couldn't be there. And so this kind of dichotomy of like the people that were trying to keep him in power, that was him himself, his family, all of these factors. I think we're going to learn lots and lots more as people can kind of unzip their lips over the coming weeks and months and years.
The unzipping of the lips in 2025. I like it, Victoria. Victoria Churshill of Young Voices. Hey, one last question, because you did indicate earlier in your comments optimism for the Trump administration 2025. What are you looking forward to about the incoming administration?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. I myself, I'm an immigrant. I'm now kind of going on a little bit of a freelancing entrepreneurship journey in my professional work. So I think that environment is going to be a lot better for people that, as I always talk about when I talk about things like immigration, is, really pursue the American dream. And we want to make sure that America returns to this idea of a shining city on a hill, which many immigrant families like my own came to this country for. I think it's a great time in the nation and in the world to be kind of having these themes, which I think are going to be present throughout the Trump presidency, as we approach our sesquicentennial, our 250th year in 2026. But then kind of more specific policy points wise, again, as an immigrant, I always talk about the fact that legal immigration is a very complex and convoluted process. And so I personally, hate seeing what happens at the southern border when people can just cut in line and, get benefits that citizens would, or even that citizens don't get, right? You look at cities like New York, free hotel rooms, handouts for college tuition, and the list goes on. But I think we're going to stop a lot of that and really, return to an era that America values things like meritocracy. And, I think that's going to be seen, like I said, not only within our own borders, but more across the world, is that we're going to be respected again. And that I think that Americans are going to be proud to call themselves that once more, which I think we necessarily haven't been over the past 4 years.
Victoria Churshill of Young Voices. Victoria, thanks so much for your insight this morning. Have a happy new year. We will talk to you again in 2025.